Good morning, Pittsburgh. Woo! Well done, feedback, I love that. So I want to say, this is my first time to Pittsburgh, and I haven't been here, and I have to say, the video demonstrates the beauty of the place and the style and the culture beautifully. What it doesn't show, sorry guys at the back, is just how impressed I am with how the city has evolved from being a steelmaking city 50 plus years ago to being one of the leaders. I would say it's the San Francisco of the East. So congratulations to Pittsburgh. I am impressed and I want to come back, just saying. All right, so let's talk about the power of influence. This is why I'm here. I'm not just an executive headhunter. I'm not just an executive coach. I also really appreciate and understand, thanks to being an emotional intelligence practitioner, about the power of influence. So the first question I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, okay? So I want to encourage you. I know you've been told to put your phones off, etc. Get your notepads out, because I'm going to be asking you questions, and I'd really like it if you could take them home or into the office to ask these questions to your colleagues, to your spouse, to your children, to your grandchildren, to anyone. There's going to be information in here that you're not going to be able to keep in your head. I know you're super intelligent people. You send people into space. You are creating autonomous driving. You're doing the most amazing things in analytics and AI. I am merely a coach and a headhunter finding innovation leaders. But I really would encourage you to take some notes, because it's the type of thing, especially on a busy and packed day, you're going to be busy. You're not going to be able to think about everything that you've just learned. So if you could do me that favor, I would appreciate it. If I do not see your heads down writing, you're clearly not curious. So, one thing I want to say out loud is that we are all leaders. A man named Daniel Goleman, who is, in my opinion, the godfather of emotional intelligence, said it. The way we lead, we all lead. When you're having a conversation with me, the way you impact, the way you communicate through your social skills, through your body language, through everything, you are leading to an ultimate destination. When you meet somebody, you're influencing their behavior. I'll give you an example. Take a deep breath. Imagine you're walking into an office or a studio or in the kitchen, wherever it might be. You suddenly look like this. This is you. You've just walked into that kitchen, that office, that studio. And the rest of the team are able to notice that there's something wrong, but they're not mind readers. An important memory for us to have is that we do not know what that person is thinking. They could have lost their keys for all we know. But you've got the boss, the team, the stakeholders, the investors, clients, customers, even your significant other and loved ones are going to be responding to subtle cues, those subtle cues. And then immediately the brain will hijack that amygdala in the brain, is going to suddenly hijack your brain, and you're going to go into either fight or flight or something completely different. Those people in that room, for example, are immediately going to anticipate and start strategizing without them even thinking about it on how they're going to handle you, how they're going to handle the situation, how they're going to handle your bad mood, how they're going to interpret it. And by doing that, you're actually creating a dance, a whole dance. And we do these dances every single day. Every single day we have an interaction with somebody, we are starting that dance. It can be a good dance. It can be a terrible dance. So meet your team. This is your Shutterstock team. If you're ever going to hire for looks, these are the people that you're going to hire. You've got John, Jane, April, and Mike. John, when looking at the boss walk through the door with a frown on her face, John thinks there's a problem with the projects and starts a defensiveness cycle. Who's been defensive in their lifetime? Jane thinks there's a funding issue because that's her key driver. That's what she thinks about. You know, is there going to be funding? Does that mean I'm going to get paid? And starts panicking. She updates her resume. 4 weeks later, she may potentially go and, you know, get another job on the other side of the country because she's panicking. That is her makeup. April is sensitive. She's a bit of an empath. And she thinks that you're annoyed with her and becomes disengaged, lost. Who has had clients or candidates, not candidates, talent within the team, or even yourself, where you've felt disengaged and lost and you can't put your finger on? Yeah, I'm up on all of these. I've been there. Mike thinks you're looking for another job. Why is Mike thinking this? Mike is thinking this. You just have to get used to that idea. And fears for his role. So imagine the kind of cycle that he is now going down. What rabbit hole is he now going down into? What conversation is Mike having with his spouse? What is he having to do to support himself at that time? The problem with that is that their actions are going to impact your success. Just let that sink in there. All because you went in with a frowny face. I know it's a bit dramatic. This is a bit dramatic. So we are leaders in our own behavior. This is what I'm saying to you. What you may automatically go in with a frown. What would it look like if you actually walked in with a different attitude, with a different persona, with a different mode that enabled you to kind of think things differently? When you walk into that meeting room or walk into the kitchen, instead of that frown, what do you want to provoke? Do you want to provoke fear? Do you want to provoke panic? Of course, if you're in the kitchen and everything's boiling over, you know, you can't really, you know, stop anything. You cannot. There is no self-control. You go into fight and flight, and you deal with it right there. But the key thing here is that we influence what they do next, whether you like it or not. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And we're going to be doing some really big work here. This is the equivalent of probably spending a month at leadership school. So this is why you've got your notepads. This is why you've got your mobile phones out, because we're going to go and do a deep dive. And then afterwards, you're going to be able to do additional research. Because one of the things I found out, I had a barbecue with an engineer friend. My husband's an engineer. And in that time, he said to me, you know, I don't like going to these HR events. I could just Google it. And he's right. I could Google it and then get that understanding. But unless you actually do the work and something kind of changes, it may just be one thing from this session that you take away with you. How can it actually help you change? But let's go under the water. Let's just see how big that iceberg is. I've got 3 examples here of 3 incredible leaders who have made an incredible impact on leadership, culture development, and the way we interact today. The very first is a dear, fantastic person. His name is Barry Oshry. I don't think you'd have heard of him, have you? No. He is so undercover. I don't know why he doesn't publicize himself more. He has created a book, and he's created numerous books, but the book that I think you will all be interested in as engineers and involved in this particular innovation space is that he wrote a book called Seeing Systems and the Systems Within an Organization, which, believe it or not, you can also carry over to your systems with your family, with estranged relatives, or anything. You're able to see how those systems play, and then you're able to be that leader and interject. He called something called the blind reflex, dance of the blind reflex. And as you know, I said earlier, you create this dance. We're creating a dance every time we interact with somebody. Usually it's going to be with people that you need to lead, you need to influence to ensure that they're able to reach the right goals. You don't want them thinking that there's something wrong and they're looking for another job. You want them engaged, you want them driven, you want them to be able to succeed and to find those solutions. But the dance of the blind reflex is fascinating because in the book, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just one of the models that he has identified in organizational behaviors and the systems. But the key thing here is that we are blind too often to those systems. And he calls them system blindness. And really what we want is system sight, understanding what that is, understanding, doing a deep dive, stepping back and doing that makes a huge difference. I've been studying this and acting on this and coaching people on this for a very long time. But it wasn't until my 16-year-old came up to me a couple of days ago and said, "Mum, I want to tell you something. Don't be angry." I'm like, okay. I braced myself to not react in an angry way. Brace. And I said, I want to really be honest with you, Mum. I said, "Oh, great. I love honesty. That's one of my favorite things." And he said, "You know, there are certain times when I say something and there are these reactions that come through from you, and I stop dead." I went, "Oh my God, of course I do. I have not been I have not been seeing, I've been system blind in my own family. I've been working on the one with my husband, I've been working on the one with my youngest, but the 16-year-old, teenager, is the one that's actually the most challenging." And he was able to give me feed forward on how I can better perform, which I loved him dearly for. So look at the systems that you have. So I have a question, and I'm going to have these questions for you at each time. There's going to be lots of questions for you to really go away and start thinking about them, which is, what systems do you need to start seeing? Evaluate your current systems. You may not like the system that you have with your boss. You may go into his meeting room or go into his office and say, "I really want to start this," and you keep getting no. That's a system in itself. And you have to find a way around this to be able to move that forward. You may go to your colleagues and say, "I got this great idea. I need to be able to turn this around and actually deliver it." You may not know that every time you go to your colleagues with an idea, it just overwhelms them, or whatever the situation is. So look at your system, start asking those intelligent questions. Second person, guru, that I want to introduce you to, you may have heard of this person. He's not so much underwater. His name is Dan Gilbert, not the one that's at Quicken Loans that's in prison right now. Just to let you know. This man has written numerous books, authored numerous books, and here his incredible TED Talk, I encourage you to read it. I think watch it. It's 10 whole minutes of your life, and it will change you profoundly. And if it doesn't, watch it again. The statement that landed with me most of all when I first saw his TED, and I reached out to him and I said, "Please come on my podcast." And he said, "Nah, I'm podcasted out." And it's like, okay, I'll just have to share your wisdom through other means, and I'll be satisfied with that. Which is that he said, human beings are a work in progress. We mistakenly think that we are finished. This is true. I remember thinking at 16, yeah, I know everything. And then you've also got the people who are in their 60s, because I coach them, who will say, these kids don't know what I know. But guess what? Flip that. What do they know that they're able to contribute? So you're able to grow. So you're able to lead and support and nurture the leaders of tomorrow that are going to be able to take the Earth, our planet, to that next level. One of the really curious things about Dan Gilbert is that he's written about happiness, and one of the things that I always said from a very long time ago is that the art of happiness, the art of life, is all about learning, because we are neuroplastic beings. Our brains want to learn. We're constantly hungry to learn. So with that knowledge, and knowing that there are people out there that are in their 90s that are starting their first business, online business. There's a 103-year-old this week I was reading. She published her first ever book of poems. I don't know what those poems are like, but that's not the point. You can do whatever you can set yourself up to do. You are not done by the time you are 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and so on. So my question to you, remember I told you, questions are going to be coming at you. How do you want to start evolving? I know during those interview questions, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? That's not helpful. thinking about what you really want to do. Look at your skills. How do you want to evolve? And as Dan Gilbert says, you will find that once you've committed to that, you actually do it in a much shorter period of time. So just get out there and do it. Just evolve. That's why we're here, EVO19. We're evolving. Oh, I pressed the wrong one. Excusez-moi. The third person I want to introduce you to is none other than Daniel Goleman, the godfather of emotional intelligence. He is 72. He's writing prolifically for Korn Ferry. He's writing prolifically for Harvard Business Review. He started courses at 72 for people to learn about emotional intelligence because it's so stinkingly important. I wrote in my book, Elephants Before Unicorns, that he was the first person to popularize emotional intelligence. It was 1992. I was just out of college. I was working at Sony, launching the PlayStation back in the UK. And at that time, I could see what was needed. The rest of the world wasn't catching up enough because we were just too kind of automated and separating work from what we needed to do and couldn't work out what was wrong. And leadership at that time was severely lacking. So whilst he's the godfather of emotional intelligence, one of the things that he says that actually kicks that all off is empathy. Now you might say, oh God, empathy. I don't want empathy. I don't want that gushy stuff. It's not about that. It's about understanding what the other person feels, what they're trying to bring, what problem they're trying to solve, why they're trying to solve that problem. It's not, clearly they may demonstrate frustration, they may demonstrate anger, they may demonstrate apathy, but there's going to be a why behind it, because maybe if they have apathy, they're in a situation where they just are tired. I know this amazing, amazing woman who is a feminist leader, and she's tired. So she no longer tries to communicate it, which I think is a desperate, desperate shame, because she has so much to share, so much knowledge to share. But with empathy, we're not talking about the kind of sticky issues that people go marching for and things like that. It's being able to understand the other person in a team environment. When you're at home with your family members and so on, you can practice with your family members. That's the safest possible way to do it. So this is how it relates to you. And you know this because you're intelligent engineers. So in a high IQ job pool, soft skills like discipline, drive, and empathy mark those who emerge as outstanding. I know you're all outstanding. I've been listening to some of your conversations previous to this. You're outstanding. But why not be curious about developing your emotional intelligence? Because there's going to be an upside to it. I have a spoiler for you. You now have the 3 keys to develop your influence abilities. How do you feel about that? I've just opened up Pandora's box for you. Gosh, wow. So now what, everyone? 4 questions. And I'm going to pause about this for a while, because these are really important questions that nobody asks me. I don't ask myself often enough. So it's the kind of questions that you should be asking yourself, or rather, instead of should, I invite you to ask for yourself. How's your empathy antenna? How's your empathy antenna? If you think it's rockingly, gorgeously fantastic, then you might want to revisit that and go, okay, well, what needs to change? If you're really thinking, well, I've been told that I have an empathy disorder and I don't feel any empathy, how do you want to improve? How do you want to evolve? What one book, what one step, what one conversation could you have to evolve that? What stories do you tell? Now, these aren't necessarily stories that you tell your children, grandchildren, nephews, nieces. This isn't about the stories that you tell other people. It's the stories that you tell yourself. And that's part of the reason why we have these dances with people. Like, oh, I'm never going to be able to get that raise. I'm never going to be able to get that rocket ship launched because I've got this great idea that's coming out. When you have that, oh, that's never going to happen, look at my body language. Where do I go? That's going to come through in all of your interactions. If my story is, oh my gosh, I'm the best person in the whole class, I blah, 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 how is that, or the best person in the organization, how is that going to impact on your relationships with people within the organization and the people that really you want to lead, bring along with you to obviously, understandably, do a lot of the work that you need so the project can move forward. What does your social energy say? Social energy is very influential. If, again, you're feeling really up and fantastic about everything, and that may be too extrovert for some people. If you're too quiet, it may be too introverted for some people, and they may not be able to understand what you can actually bring. So think about your social energy, how that actually impacts your ability to be successful, which comes through influence. And what productive norms and stories do you want to create? Dan Gilbert was really clear. You know, we are evolving constantly. We're moving, we're shaking. Whatever you want to set your mind to, you can do it. Seriously. I wrote a little while ago that I'm going to write a book. I didn't know what I was going to write a book about at the time. This is a long time ago. But I want to write a book that can make changes. And then before I knew it, after writing for Forbes and doing various other things, I was writing a book. Wow! So think about what norm you want to create. How do you want to be seen? Where do you want to go? You know, even if you're at the top of your game, there's opportunity for development, always. We are not stagnant. We're not born to be stagnant. So I have 2 case studies from 2 lovely people that I know and work with. The first one is Nicole Gravagna. I call her Brains because she's a neuroscientist. She's an entrepreneur, an author, and an executive coach. And I had her on my podcast in season 1. And she told me this story, which really resonated with me, and it made complete sense as to why she went from being a neuroscientist into understanding emotional intelligence and how our brains operate and function to create those social norms and organizational norms, and how we lead and how we evolve and how we move forward. And she started off the conversation. I never know where podcast conversations are going to go. That's the beauty of having these podcast conversations. I just said, so how did you get to where you're going now? And she said, well, I was doing a presentation on how to be a VC and how to pitch your VCs, because she had sold numerous startups to VCs. So she knew that landscape really well. And I'm sure you know the VC landscape, or you've heard of the VC landscape. It's pretty cutthroat. It's very, very hard. So that was the environment that she was in. And she was a neuroscientist. So at the end of the event, so imagine everybody's just left here. Someone came up to her and he said, are you all right? And she said, what? What are you talking about? He said, well, you seem really stressed. He said, what? I don't understand that, but thanks. She spent a lot of time trying to work out what was going on, and then went down that path of, instead of being a neuroscientist, whereby you're focusing on it in a particular way, it's to understand emotional intelligence and how you are able to work on your emotional and social operating system, so you are able to change the way that you behave for the long run. And that was extremely huge for her, that she could do that, just like for anybody to be able to do that. The next person I want to introduce you to, his name is Rob Pardo. I worked with his company for 6 months this year in Orange County. And Rob Pardo's previously at Blizzard, was previously Chief Creative Officer at Blizzard. If people play games, or your kids play games, or you've heard of World of Warcraft, he was the Chief Creative Officer behind that billion-dollar company, which eventually Activision, a major company, acquired. He then started a company called Bonfire, and he wanted to do something very different. Whilst he was at Blizzard, he was creating IP after IP very, very successfully. And what he stumbled on was creating this very small project with a very small amount of people called Hearthstone. And when that project launched, rave reviews, everybody absolutely loved it, but that was a proof of concept that you could create something where you focus on the team. And if you go to Venture Beat, you'll be able to see the interview where I extracted this quote, where he says, "Build the team, not the product." Of course, you've got to build the product, but the team is the most important thing. As I always said, ever since I was working at Sony Computer Entertainment in London, I remember distinctly looking around and seeing that because I'm a huge empath, I was able to feel everybody's issues. I could feel how they were disjointed or disconnected or not really 100% focused on what was needed. It wasn't a cohesive team. And I remember at the time going, what is up here? And it's because the team wasn't built. We were so focused on the product. And so the PlayStation is still incredibly successful. So that wasn't the issue. It was a very successful product regardless. But the point is that something that I've held to be true for the past 20 years, other people are also focusing on that too. So what are the results? What do you think the results are, people, of developing your emotional intelligence, your social skills, and all of these great things? Anyone want to say what the results might be? Yeah, I'm going to get a bit of audience participation. Nice. Energy. Anything else? Engagement. Collaboration. Ideas come to life. Creativity, collaboration, solutions, ownership, passion, radical candor. Read Kim Scott's book, it's fantastic. Trust. But how can you make that happen? Every single interaction starts with discovery. I know that sounds like incredibly hard work, but you have to. I know, it's like, what do you mean? I've got to sit with somebody and get to know what they had for breakfast? No, that's not what this is about. You want to discover the root cause of something, ideally without showing frustration, without anger, with real, genuine curiosity. Because you know that if this person can solve the problem, they can go off and do it. This is why you hired them, or this is why you work with them, or this is why they're there. Really focus on a daily journey of connection. You may think to yourself, no, I need to work in my corner office alone. I do that. I have to work by myself to get my head straight. I do that all the time. Don't tell anyone. But I know when I'm connecting with my team, who are all over the world, and I'm able to explain what the problem is, what the challenge is, all of a sudden, those solutions go from here to here. They're just significantly better. So think about how you can connect with people that you may not normally connect with. It may be over coffee, something really informal, also obviously something a lot more formal. But it's about connecting with the individual rather than it being something that is just a quick, deeper, meaningless conversation. You really want to understand what the issue is, if you can. So think more purposefully about how you are actually in the driving seat of your evolution of influence. Think also about your evolution of you as a coach, because you are a coach, whether or not you like it or not. If you're a leader, you're a coach. You're a mentor. You're helping people solve those incredibly difficult problems. So think about how you can evolve it. And if I'm preaching to the converted already, great. How can you evolve it even more? Be present with all, also known as listen. Listening is a skill we all really, 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 usually 99% of us are very bad at. I wrote an article once, The Parisian Art of Listening. I was in Paris and I was just my jaw kept falling, where I could see these people engaged in conversation. They weren't interrupting. Their eyes were on them. The phones were away. They were 100% focused on that individual to have that meaningful conversation, to have that meaningful connection, and to understand what the issue was. They had a coffee by the side of them. They were so absorbed in that conversation. They weren't looking over their shoulder to see who might be coming to rescue them or get involved, to be super social. They were listening intently. And people appreciate that. And you're all engineers, so you already have this learning mindset. But how can you make it even more of a learning mindset? Because you're here to learn, and that's fantastic. I really, my heart just fills up when I know that people want to actively learn. Not just for some credits on a document, but genuinely want to learn. So think about your learning mindset, what you're going to be learning today. Some of the greats spend 5 hours a week in learning mode. I know if I don't spend at least 30 minutes a day in learning mode, reading Harvard Business Review or something, I start stagnating and I start feeling a bit depressed. So, because it's just electrifies the brain. I love it. So what's the impact? We've discussed some of these already. You're going to develop positive relationships. You're going to be able to share the vision and influence that a lot more successfully. It's all for the greater good, unless you have some Machiavellian intent. Let's hope not. And to create an environment of trust. It all equals influence. So I have a final question. What are you going to do about this? I saw a shrug. I saw that shrug. You don't have to answer this question right now. What I would really encourage is that you look at that question on Monday morning before you go to work, whilst you're brushing your teeth. Our brains have an amazing way of answering that question latently, very quietly, in the back. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. But you're able to process that, and then you're on your way. Thank you very much for your time. So I think it's question time. Is it question time? Aha! Oh, I think we need a mic. I think it's coming. I was on time. Michael, I was on time. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the engaging talk there. So you mentioned learning mindset, and you said, oh, well, we're engineers, we like to learn, that's great. But I think one thing that maybe you didn't touch on very much, which is learning from other people and being open to that. And one thing I noticed, with I don't know if you call it our kind, that's maybe an overgeneralization, but things are textbook for us often, and our social aptitude is I think generally worse than maybe others. I don't know. So learning mindset with other people, how do we learn from other people, and what are your thoughts on what that means in the context of your talk?
Absolutely. Well, one of the, I think is a great question. How can we learn from other people? Ask them questions. Actually say to them, I really want to learn about this particular aspect that you're working on. What can you share? What would you like to share with me so I can learn something that I didn't know about? And sometimes that's a really hard question to ask, because too often we feel like we should know the answer to everything. But if you can get into the habit of asking in that way, say, I really want to learn this. And how you started this conversation by saying, I'm an engineer, I love to learn. That's a great icebreaker. And people will really appreciate that. And chances are, once they feel heard, they'll want to learn from you as well.
Hello?
Hello.
So I guess I got a better icebreaker. How much does a polar bear weigh?
How much does a polar bear weigh?
Yeah.
A ton?
Enough to break the ice.
Ah!
Canadian joke, there you go. Right? I guess one of the things is like, yeah, we want to be more collaborative, and I guess one of the things with like electrical engineering is that you're gonna have to have some sort of social awkwardness to kind of get into the program.
Yeah.
So right. So
There's
it's
always social awkwardness, yes.
one of the things I notice, anyways, is that people like who go into industry right after their bachelor's degree, they tend to be a little bit more outgoing than those who tend to. I wouldn't say they're always. That's probably a blanket statement, but you see a lot when people go into master's, PhD programs. They tend to come out of it, I guess, a little bit more
Focused?
Definitely focused. But I'm dating somebody right now who's in their master's program, and she even said it like statistically, people tend to have mental illness after like having a master's or a PhD, just because. I'm not even saying that all of them, but it's just because they spend so much time alone doing their research, long hours and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So perhaps one way to kind of combat, we're saying, when you get into the workforce, like these are the things that you need to look for. We should really be focusing on how are we educating people, and maybe creating a more collaborative kind of focus of education early on, as opposed to, starting when they're working. Especially in university, where we see the trends of, your social skills going downhill because you're spending so much time focusing on your research and stuff like that. I don't know how you can change that, but...
Well, it is changing a lot. So in schools these days, and unfortunately I don't know the American system particularly well, but the Canadian system I know a little bit of, because both my children are in it. And everywhere you go, they talk about, be kind, and they teach how to communicate and how to collaborate well, and what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. And I think the Generation Z is going to get it right in that particular area. The people who are, let's say, in their 30s plus, if they've been involved in that kind of environment where they've just been 100% focused, and that is usually their preferred habitat. And that's okay. That means that they are deep thinking introverts, and it's about really finding out, and this is where there needs to be flexibility. When you can see a system, is to go in and see how it can be adapted, how it can evolve, how it can improve, and every little bit helps. Did that answer your question, or?
Sort of. I mean, it's just it's kind of more of a statement in terms of,
okay.
I don't expect you to answer how do we change, the education system on.
Yeah, how do we change? I think the education system is changing. There's a lot of soft skills. Emotional intelligence is being is brought into it now. But as usual, I mean, teachers are overstretched. It's very hard for them to do what they're doing. But things are changing. Just think about how we've been in the past 50 years, how we've evolved in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Things are changing.
You're correct. I see it too. Like, I have a couple friends that are just going through their education degree, and you can see it already for sure.
Yeah.
And, I completely agree.
Question.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi. You had a slide that mentioned that you should be building the team before the product. And I was wondering if there's ever an instance or several instances that you could argue the case for the opposite.
Sorry, argue the case for it being
building
product
the product
first?
before the team, yes.
Absolutely. And I would say yes, it will. So there are going to be situations where if the product has been built and all of a sudden it's got to be distributed internationally, let's say it's been built in Tokyo, just like the PlayStation, let's use that as an example. You've then got the product that is already there. It then needs to be localized. It then needs to be marketed to the local community and things, etc. You've still got to think about the local team. You can't have a cookie cutter scenario. There's just like if you're in pharmaceuticals, if you've got Xanax, you're not going to be able to market it in certain European countries because there may be bans or whatever the situation is, in which case you would have to have a team that would be able to try and launch that effectively. So I think the team does come first. Sometimes the product's already there. Sometimes the product hasn't been made. Sometimes you've already got a product and then you need to evolve it. It needs to become a 2.0, or the market shifts so much that you have to then completely overhaul it, and then you have to, ideally, right at the very beginning, have had a team and people mindset, leadership mindset, where everybody was evolving towards that already. So when you hear about somebody in one particular industry saying, oh, this industry can't do that, well, and I was talking to a lovely lady this morning about it, you have to look at outside influences. And that's why hiring externally happens a lot from industry, because they haven't evolved the people within the organization to be able to make that transition. So if you're looking to build a company full of people that are able to see the product through for a long period of time, which doesn't happen in this day and age, nobody has a job for life, you're in a situation where you could actually buck that trend. If you've got that product, how can it evolve? Which means working on your team.
So would you mostly say that is in the instance of when you have the product already, versus starting from nothing and then saying, I'm going to start a company and I need to start either concentrating on the team or the product?
I think you need to concentrate on both.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. When I look at Rob Pardo, they and his company Bonfire, it was a very similar situation. They started the company, I think it was 3 years ago. They didn't have a product. They started from scratch. They wanted to create something that was truly relevant for the entire team. So they built the team first. That is quite rare. But I think if you're able to prioritize the team and their evolution and their leadership and their training, and to help them evolve their learning mindset and their coachability, etc., their leadership, etc., it's going to be fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Well, one last question, given the time. There you go.
I got the microphone. Hey, I have a term that I wanted to share with you, and it's
Thank you.
Years ago, a gentleman had engineer friend of
Could
mine.
you put the microphone a little bit closer?
Okay, I have no problem with doing that. A friend of mine, engineer, he had an interesting term that you might want to take with you. It's called being a recovering engineer.
All right, cool.
Excellent, excellent.
All right, thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you. Thank you.